Ladies and gentlemen, with no further introduction needed, please join me in welcoming Congressman Paul. Like the campaign goes on. Wonderful. I really want to thank you for coming because I understand you took great risk in coming here. Your name may be on a list. You may have had your picture taken, so I realize that you had to take that type of risk to make it here, but I deeply appreciate that. It's very nice that you came, but hopefully we will remain patriotic and peaceful and eventually show that the opposition, those who would like to curtail our activities, are really the problem that we face in this country. Because we're in big trouble on our foreign policy, big trouble financially, monetarily, and the people now are looking for the answers, and I am totally convinced that we can find our answers in what we're doing and in just following the United States Constitution. Our economy currently is in shambles, and it was, as you saw in the viewpoint, many had predicted it. Not only I who had been talking about it, but it was a predictable event because of the nature of the monetary system. We had a financial house of cards, and we knew it, and we knew that house of cards would come down. That house of cards had been being built since 1971. Major events in our history, recent history, was the formation of the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944, and that was a pseudo-gold exchange standard where the dollar was supposed to be golden rule. It would be always exchanged with $35 an ounce. Well, it didn't take too long for the Federal Reserve to get ahead of itself and print too much money where it was obviously unbacked anymore at $35 an ounce. That, as was predicted even when it was established in 1944, came to an end precipitously on August 15, 1970, a fragile house on an unsound foundation. Well, the foundation isn't very good either. The house has come down, and the only foundation it was built on was sand, and that sand was the U.S. dollar. And the dollar is doomed. The dollar can't be revived unless all of a sudden we come to our senses, stop spending, balance the budget, bring our troops home, and pay down our debt, get rid of the income tax, and let people go back to work. When countries have suffered with inflation, and what most people refer to as inflation is somewhat incorrect. They think about prices going up. That is a consequence of inflation. Inflation is when the government or a Federal Reserve System or central bank increases the money supply. But when the prices go up, the people respond and they say, there's not enough money. Even in this pseudo-deflationary period, we don't have deflation because the money supply is skyrocketing. It's just that there's deflation in the financial instruments because the stock values have gone down, the house values have gone down. But even under those conditions, the cry is always for there's not enough money. And what have we done? Essentially, in these last 2 years, I mean, there was way too much inflation before that, and we have just literally pumped the money out there to try to hold this bubble together, but it's not put, and it hasn't come back. Now, this situation is very risky, not only financially for all of us. How do you survive when a financial system breaks down? How many people have lost in the stock market and the value of their houses? That is very dangerous. But the real reason that I get concerned about it is because of the economic chaos that generally comes with a financial crisis and a monetary crisis is the threat to our liberties. And that is what we should be concerned about. We want a sound monetary system, a sound economic system, because we want to protect every single one of us, our individual liberty. That is our goal. resort, and they needed a stable currency. So, but now I don't think it's a lender of last resort. I think it's become a spender of first resort. We talk about the hundreds of billions of dollars the Congress appropriates, and sometimes I just think that's a distraction, because the big event is occurring at the Federal Reserve System. This is where the power is. And this is where the control is, whether it's international, what they do, and it was described to you earlier, all those things that they do that we're not allowed to know anything about. So I now call the Federal Reserve System the fourth branch of government. It is essentially equivalent to, if not superior to, the other three branches. Now, it seems to be a hopeless task, but if we remember how the Federal Reserve came into existence, we should remember how we can get rid of it. It was done by a congressional act, and we can get rid of it by a congressional act, and we should. Most people ask me, it makes so much sense. Most people understand that, if you print a lot of money, it's going to lose its value. Why is it that the members of Congress and everybody goes along with this? And it's an interesting question because it's for different reasons. A lot of them never even thought about it, and they were never taught about it. And during the bubble phase, they're not too worried about it because there's an appearance of wealth. But what they don't realize is that the wealth is based on really borrowed money and an illusion about the value of the currency. So the value of the house goes up, and they claim that's a lot of capital, which it is not. And stocks go up. They think they have a lot of wealth, which they do not, because that can disappear rather quickly. So the Federal Reserve then has only about one thing to do. They have to keep the whole thing going over and over again. But the members of Congress are paying more attention, and that is good. But those who are in charge, those who are in leadership of Republicans and Democrats, I think they know generally what's going on. But there's only two groups that we have to worry about in Washington that want to continue this process. And that tends to be the liberals and the conservatives. But they get along quite well. They pretend not to get along, but they get along pretty well because liberals like to spend, for one thing, they like the welfare state. And the conservatives like it because they like the warfare state. So they get together and they compromise, and we have both. So now we suffer from the welfare warfare state, which is what we need to repeal. Big time, big, very, very important times. And that is why we must pay attention. And that is why our campaign that we're in the middle of right now has to win, because our country is threatened if we don't understand what liberty really means and how it's connected to the financial system and how it's connected to the Federal Reserve. But on the other side, there's a lot of spending in Washington to pursue our adventures overseas. Just think of the wonderful opportunity that we had in 1989. It probably was even a bigger opportunity than what came after World War II. The Depression came, World War II was there. Some people say that Roosevelt ended the Depression. That is not true. Some people said the war ended the Depression. Can you imagine the depressed times being ended by sending 1 million or 2 million people over to be exposed to gunfire and getting killed and have rationing? That didn't end it. But the household debt was finally eliminated after World War II. But our government did something else after World War II. They cut spending by 2/3, and they cut taxes by 1/3, and then there were consumer demands, and then the Depression finally ended. So that is what was available to us in 1989 when the Cold War ended, when the Soviet system collapsed. Not because we had a lot of nuclear weapons, not because we attacked them and they had lost a military battle. What did they do? They did exactly what Mises predicted they would do. They would fail for economic reasons.